Okay, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to the presentation about managing your CMDB data. My name is Roberto Corradi, or Rob Corradi. I'm a senior consultant with NiZSN, and I'll be taking you through this presentation this afternoon. So, as usual, first thing on the list there is just to run through the agenda. So, a brief introduction about myself, some notes about NiZSN, and we'll get into the core of the presentation about where the challenge is, how those challenges are evolving in the modern day, defining what we mean by clean data, talking about how we address or recommend that you address these challenges. I'll touch upon the BDNA technology and solutions that we want to present in this area, and then I'll run through the benefits that clean data will bring to you as a consumer of that data, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. So just briefly about myself, I have been working in IT service management, IT asset management roles now for some 11 years. I initially started working in change management and then moved on into configuration and IT asset management roles. So there's a few examples here of personal experiences that I've encountered over the years in this space, and that way I know it's true problems that people are facing. Then moving on to NiZSN company I work for. So we're a UK-based company with global reach. Customers currently include those in America and other countries. We've got a healthy turnover, shall we say, and around 220 people. We've been a ServiceNow partner for over 4 years, and now a preferred solutions partner since that new badge option became available. We've got over 50 consultants, around 30 implementation certified consultants. We've got a number of customers in different sectors of industry. There'll be another slide shortly giving a bit more information. And then we're also a reseller. We do services, training, support, and develop our own intellectual property. Differentiators for NiZSN. So we invest heavily in our people, and brings us to a holistic approach that's proven from a number of customers and clients that we've worked with over the years. There's the good, the bad, and ugly, of course, reference. So, you know, the expertise and experience through good and bad, learning and improving. And we are building our own intellectual property as well. For those of you who know a bit of ServiceNow, there's a site called Share for ServiceNow, and we are the #1 partner for IP materials being shared on that portal at this time. One of the big things that we focus on today in this time is hearts and minds. So technology, yes, is important to all of our solutions, but bringing your people and your processes along with that technology is also vital. Otherwise, technology alone tends not to succeed. And IT transformation partner, having worked with various clients in this space as well. So just touching upon customers, some past, some current, wide variety from lots of different sectors of industry. So you've got finance, energy, food and drink, networks, many, many more. And you know, there's more than this, obviously, than we can go through at this point in time. So I'm going to move straight on to where we see that the challenge is. So management will often ask the question saying, you say there's a problem, how does it affect us? They'll ask questions like, why can't you just fix it? They'll ask questions like, why can't you get me that report, or why is that report not trustworthy? And therein lies a part of the problem, in that once things have gone wrong, making sure that people understand the implications to the company is difficult. And it's easy to introduce errors. So having good data quality, as it says there, allows for better efficiency, eliminating confusion and errors. So on the screen, first glance, Microsoft and Microsoft. Well, first glance for me, certainly. In actual fact, one of them's got a typical typo. The I and the R in the wrong position, and that's now an incorrect name. We see cases where people can free type information into that asset repository or the CMDB. Once you've got that data in the system, it's available for other users to select or reference. What begins as one erroneous record then starts to mushroom and grow and cause more and more impact in the system. Then the other area of challenge is around consistency. So a nice example for me in particular at this point in time is, what operating system are you running? So there's two answers there, 6.3.9600 and 8.1. And the answer is, in fact, yes, they're both the same. They both are Windows 8.1. Most people refer to it as Windows 8.1. In other areas, when you start doing software asset management and discovery, you'll start to get the lower level version number coming in, and not having a consistent point of reference will make things challenging for you. So, for instance, software audits are a current favorite with lots of vendors as a way to G up their revenue streams. So if you don't already set that information to a consistent answer within your organization, it's going to add time to translate and map that if an audit should occur. And when those delays are perceived by the vendor and their auditing partner, then they'll start to question how good and consistent your data is, and then start to bring more trouble to you. Other areas that the data then goes on to impact, things like product recalls and emergency fixes. So Windows XP is finally out of support, end of life, and yet within a week or so there's a 0-day critical bug. Microsoft did offer a security patch for that. So now to get that patch to those machines, you need to be able to identify them. You need to be able to know that they're categorically Windows XP to send that down. Yes, there are systems that can assist in that, but having that data, knowing the scope of your problem, is critical to being able to address it and know that it's being completed. And then the other aspect on this is, now it's out of life, companies are finally looking to upgrade off of this operating system. So if they're moving to, say, Windows 7 or Windows 8, 8.1, then the requirements on your desktop infrastructure are different. So if you don't have the information to know the CPU, the memory, the disk, etc. on those Windows XP machines, you can't be certain that you can upgrade them to Windows 7. If you don't know where you are in the warranty, depreciation life cycle of those machines, again, you don't know if you should upgrade them to Windows 7. Another case that we've seen over the years, cases of hardware problems, firmware updates need to be applied to systems. The manufacturers will get in touch, say this model or this serial number range need to have a firmware or BIOS update or some other fix applied. If you don't have that consistent, reliable data in your asset or CMDB repository, you're not going to be able to find the scope of the problem in your organization and deliver upon fixing those. It's not completely simple, unfortunately, because within the CMS, the configuration management system, the CMDB, the concept of having that one source of truth is great, but within different factions and sections of the business, there are different answers. So your procurement guys will probably talk about supplier reference numbers and supplier descriptions of devices. Your operational teams will describe things in a way that's good for them, and contract management people may have another set of descriptors there, and then you bring discovery in and you've got yet another. So it could be that every group is doing the right thing and talking in a standard way, but when you bring those together, you may end up with 4 different ways of describing what is one device, CI, asset at the end. On top of that, you bring in problems with organizations, so mergers and acquisitions, divestitures and reorganizations. Divestitures is probably the least of the problem listed, because if we're quite blunt, you're passing that out to another organisation, so perhaps it ceases to be your concern. But mergers and acquisitions certainly are troublesome because different organisations will come together with different standards, and from first-hand experience on a global enterprise, you can say that despite what senior management may say, it didn't take a year to bring it all together. It took far longer than that. So having that consistency will help in that space as well. Oh, right. So there's a real-world example that I just wanted to bring up. And in this, it's some hardware model descriptions, model IDs, if you will, that a part of the organisation had defined. And this is just 11 of the 25 distinct descriptors that they had for a Dell PowerEdge 1750. This is not the attributes of the CPU itself. This is in the model description from the asset repository. And the problem there is that this will then go into your CMDB and will go there. When you put a service request in saying, I need a Dell PowerEdge 1750 that's certified for product A, you've now got all of these different options just at the model level before you could even go to pick the correct CI or asset or in the stock room or what have you. So that's in some ways a self-inflicted data quality issue. And again, this comes back to the case of they did have a standard way of naming the models. It's not one that I would perhaps recommend, but it was a standard that they had adopted, and it was at odds with the standards of other areas of the business, causing additional problems in the databases. Then when you take an example like that, you've got to start looking for information. So screenshot there of a filter from ServiceNow where people are looking for all the Dell Latitude and Optiplex machines. So you can see immediately there's lots of all statements, there's starts with statements, there's uppercase and lowercase, etc. All of these lead to problems at a number of levels. To build that filter, first, if that's a job allocated to a member of staff, I need to know all of the Dell Latitude and Optiplex machines that we have in the organization for a contract true up. If they do not know about that inconsistency of the data, they would likely go in with Dell Latitude Optiplex and come up with the wrong number. And then you go back and true up on perhaps too low a number and you have exposure. Then there's the situation of, to build this, if they do know that there's a data problem, they've got to go through the extra steps. It will just simply take longer. That could be a few minutes. It could be more than a few minutes. But again, you're losing time with your staff, spending time building this more complicated query. And then there's also the impact of this query on the system. Where this query may take 5 seconds to run on a large scale of data, if it's a one-off, that's probably acceptable. If that's something that you then embed in a report, and that report goes into a dashboard or a gauge that is run regularly, those 5 seconds of impact are going to be repeated thousands of times. So you take that 5 seconds of impact, if it's run 1,000 times in a day, you end up with 1.4-ish hours of lost time just from inefficiency on that query. Now, that may not seem a lot to start with, but you start doing 1.4 hours a day, every day of the week, or every working day of the week, all year long, you start finding that very quickly you're actually losing a bit of a day or a man's salary for an employee in your organisation. So that's a minor case, but then there's also the impact of the inefficient query on the actual system itself. So that ineffective query is causing the system to take longer to query the database, and that's going to continue to impact other users of the tool as well. So it's got this mushrooming effect from an efficiency perspective also. Then below, we see what the query should look like, really. Nice, succinct, easy. You can read that as a human being quite quickly. You can see it's Dell or Latitude and Latitude or Optiplex in the model name. So that's where you start to get consistency and benefit. Now, it's not just the things that you do, unfortunately. The software vendors aren't being particularly helpful, shall we say. And there's a lot of people out there. I know there's people doing the campaign for clear licensing, trying to get clarity from them, etc. So picking on Microsoft once more, just for this moment, these are examples of SQL Server. The edition name is probably what most end users will know the edition by. Then you've got the lower level version numbers, and to top it all, they're changing those by service pack. And what makes it worse is that at this point, I've not made any mention of whether it's a 32-bit or a 64-bit version of the operating system. And then they come and audit you, and you don't have the right information. So it'll take you longer to pull your data together. As I mentioned earlier, that delay will probably give the auditors an inkling that you may have some data problems, and they will be perhaps a bit more persistent. A case in point, organization was audited by a vendor. I think they had some of the order of 5 people dedicated to that audit defense for at least 3 months to pull the data together. So you've lost 5 people for 3 months just to pull the data together. Net result, the vendor wasn't trusting of the outcome particularly, and things went on. In the end, I think it took of the order of 6 months for the final outcome, and it wasn't as favourable to the customer as you may have wanted. To stop picking on Microsoft for a moment, I just thought we'd touch upon the open source community a little bit. Again, you've got code names and you've got version names, and it can easily get confused. I'll touch upon a little bit later with bring your own device, etc. I've got a Android device. Perhaps I come into the office. I will know what version I'm running and even the code name for it. Other people will not. So you may get someone making that phone call to your service desk saying, I've got a problem with my device. They start asking a few questions to get to the bottom of it. They know it's Android. Which version is it? And that's where real life can confuse IT. So you've got honeycomb and you've got ice cream sandwich, and in real life there is also something called honeycomb ice cream. So you can imagine an end user who's not very knowledgeable phoning in your support desk and claiming that I'm running honeycomb ice cream. I know it seems a bit silly and trivial, but these things will happen. That's the nature of the data. So as I said, further complications as we evolve the challenges in this area. All of the ITSM vendors these days are pushing their social capabilities. So you're starting to bring other ways that users can interact with the system, allowing more interesting data to be generated. If you allow end users to type data in free text, then statistically you will end up with every possible combination you can think of. You will end up with the Microsoft and Microsoft. You will end up with white spaces at the front, at the end. You will end up with Microsoft Corp, Corporation, etc., etc. And you'll end up with that reference data that will then touch upon other areas of your asset and CMDBs, causing data quality issues. Other challenge we have now, enterprises particularly very global. You've got different standards from different countries. You've got different character sets, different languages. I've seen people injecting special characters into data, and even situations where different countries describe the same thing in different ways. It may seem quite simple and trivial. I happen to be sat on the first floor of a building today in the UK. I would call that floor 1. From an IT perspective, I'd probably put a leading 0 on the front of that and say I'm on floor 01. If I were in Singapore, I would probably call it floor 1F. So you've got 2 different ways of describing the floor in this case. And then you've got other complications where if I wanted to go to the ground floor, when I go into the lift or elevator, I would press the G button. In some countries, that would get me to the garage, not the ground floor. In America, maybe you press L for lobby. So there's all these sorts of things coming in, these cultural differences that influence upon the data that we have. Then add your mobile and bring your own devices with autocorrect. You can go out there on the web, you can see the hilarious outcomes from messaging interactions where people have autocorrect and end up with a word they don't expect. Someone may be at a station, at an airport, doing some piece of work on their personal device with their mobile smartphone or tablet. They get distracted as they type something in and don't realize that autocorrect kicks in and change the piece of data that they're sending into the system to something else. These are all possibilities. This is the nature of IT that we have to deal with. So nothing would ever be complete in IT unless we quoted a nice Dilbert cartoon. So I'll give you guys all a moment to just read that and point out that this is an example of making sure that the management understand the impact of the poor data on what you can provide them. So it's all well and good looking at Dilbert and having a little smile to ourselves. It becomes a little bit less amusing when we start looking at the figures. So from 2008 report, Gartner said average per annum was 8.2 million through poor data quality. In 2013, unfortunately, that number has gone up, not down. So 2013, another $4 million being lost annually from poor data quality. And then you add to that, this is from the 2008 figures, 22% of the companies queried. So just under a quarter of them thought that they were losing $20 million a year from bad data. And that's not just the things that I pointed out earlier where there's inefficient reporting or querying, system impact and so forth. When you get to the point that end users do not trust the data that they are seeing and they are second guessing and re-questioning and double checking, then they're doing more work. And I can say that from personal experience because you could sometimes get a report out of a system and sit there thinking, I just don't believe those numbers can be correct. And you'd run double checks and triple checks and go to other systems and people to confirm that. And all of those things are going to cost you time and money. So, move on to defining what we mean by clean data. So, good data quality, knowing the provenance of your data. So, knowing where it's come from. So, know that it came from Bob's spreadsheet. But more than that, knowing that you can trust Bob's data because Bob owns that data and is accountable for it. Or being less simplistic, knowing that it comes from another golden source, a trusted integration to another system, knowing that that is the system that manages that data. So those are pretty standard things. The next one is something that I think people don't focus on enough, and it's knowing that the data that you have is the best it can be. So it's one of those things where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. When you bring the data together, additional metadata maybe enhance that and bring you something even more valuable to your business. For anyone who may know me on the call today, one of my personal bugbears, and that's where the Microsoft item came from, is around reference data. I think companies often overlook the reference data that they own themselves. So within the CI, you'll have an assignment group. You need consistency, you need reliable data there. We've touched upon the vendor, software vendor, there's the hardware vendor, there's the location data. All of these things need to be controlled and managed. Some of them will become some automation and discovery, and that's where we'll go into the BDNA solution shortly. And other of those are things that you will need to take control and ownership of as an organization and make sure it's the best it can be. Because once one of those things goes wrong, you can guarantee it will start to, almost like a disease, infect your data quality. One bad reference data attribute can infect tens, if not hundreds of thousands of CIs or asset records. Brings me to a nice analogy that I saw. This was while doing my web trawling and preparing the presentation. And it's quite simple. If you considered your data to be water, would you be willing to drink it? And I can say hand on heart that I probably wouldn't have in many roles that I've been through over the years, despite the hard work to try and improve that data quality. And it brings us nicely on to how we can look to address the challenge. So I think from the presentation, hopefully, you've noticed that there's probably two clear ways that I'm indicating in addressing the challenge, achieve the goal. And that's the control on data input and entry. So that's where humans are involved in the process. of maintaining that data, not just trusted sources. And then there's also the rationalize, normalize that data. So that's where we're going to talk about technology, the things that you can't do easily, certainly as a human being. And on the control and input, I think that's where the hearts and minds approach that we bring is important. It's making sure that your staff, your people are aware, they buy into it and they support it, because otherwise, as usual, any change, people resist. So, which approach do you need? I think I may have answered that one for you already. Both, obviously. Neither is going to solve the problem on your own. Automation discovery means that control and input of the data is never going to be enough. You're going to have to look at that data, because typically companies will not have just one golden source of data. You'll start to get two sources talking about the same CI. So, as I said before, Innovyze can help in this area. We've got expertise, experience, knowledge in this, in doing data transformation work, and brings us nicely on to BDNA, which is a certified technology to integrate into ServiceNow. So, just briefly on BDNA, they're an organization that have been providing solutions since 2000, and their solutions, there's two key parts of it, and that's the Technopedia catalog content, which is the reference data, and the normalize tool. So that's going to clean things up for you. And just for your reference, again, went out there, found this reference. So the ITSM Review is an independent organization, done a review of tools in this space, and towards the end of last year, they did the review, and BDNA was given best in class because of what it can do. So I'm going to briefly talk through the BDNA solution. At the end, I will provide a link to a very useful YouTube clip from BDNA, which perhaps covers it better than I can. So the first thing is these plugins to extract data from your sources and to then start to aggregate them. So you go and grab things from the SCCM, SCOM, other Tivoli, what have you, sources, bring it together, aggregate, and then you've got to map that. It gets mapped against the Technopedia catalog. So the Technopedia catalog, the last quote I had, it was tracking around 1 million distinct IT hardware models and software releases, and around 40 million contextual elements. So there's a lot of reference data there, and it's growing. So once that's been mapped against that, the next thing is the normalization engine, the special source, if you like. So that's where they'll remove noise, deduplicate, and finally normalize your data. So that's where you get to clean data, and then that item we mentioned about making your data as good as it can be. So enhancing your data now. So adding value to it that is relevant, obviously, and that's where the market intelligence on Technopedia content packs come in. And then finally, the important thing is maintaining its current. So you set the frequency. Technopedia, I believe, is updated on a daily basis, and you as an end user can set a schedule on how often you want to get updated and run these processes. So that will get you to your consistent, clean, complete, and current data. The benefits. So if we just focus on the item in red at the moment, so once you have got that clean, consistent, current data, what does it mean? So incident problem change to your core IT service management processes, getting incidents routed to the right place at the right time. I was at the service desk show a couple of years ago, and someone had designed a tool just to do ticket ping pong measurements. That's where the end user calls the support desk, logs a ticket, gets routed to a support desk, from the support desk rather to a support group, who then send it back saying that's not us. And then it gets routed to another group, who maybe push it to someone else who says it's not us. So all of this is impacting on your time to resolve the incident and get onto root cause and fixing. And when you look at some organizations, particularly certainly in the market, financial market space, if that problem is customer facing, the damaged brand has been given a number. I believe it was of the order of thousands of dollars per minute of a customer-facing outage. And certainly on those financial markets with the quick time turnaround and trades, etc., I think a minute would be bad. If you start looking at an hour because the ticket's getting misrouted to the wrong support team, you'll probably find that your contract's getting terminated with them and you're losing more than just the brand damage. Then on the asset management and SAM side, again, consistency, being able to speak about your software in a consistent manner. If you're going to call it Windows 8.1, call it Windows 8.1. If you're going to call it, was it 6.3.9600, then do so, but be consistent. It's that problem when you go back to the vendor and you've got one line item saying we've got 1,000 8.1 instances and we've got 2,000 6.3.9600 instances, that is going to probably set them thinking you don't actually know what you're talking about, and it's going to give them the initiative, the want to dig a bit deeper into your data. When you can get to that vision in software asset management that the letter comes from an audit and you click a button and generate a report in a standard format and send it back to them, that's likely to curtail the audit a lot more quickly because they're going to start seeing that there's no value in chasing you down. And as I touched upon before, we do know that the vendors, the software vendors, are actively pursuing software audits as a revenue stream. I know from certain events I've been to that, for instance, Oracle moved their auditing team into the revenue and sales section of the corporation. So they've grown that where they don't see sales, they're going to come in and audit. And all of the vendors are looking at that. We hear things about Adobe being particularly difficult to audit with as well. And then moving on to CMDB. So your CIs are at the heart of all your ITSM processes. If the CIs are not accurate, then your change incident problem processes cannot be accurate. You cannot be 100% certain that the change is not going to have an unwarranted effect. Automation. If you are not, as an organization, already looking at automating and orchestrating processes, then it's very likely that you will be, because that's a sweeping trend in the IT workspace. And how can you orchestrate if you can't guarantee that you've got the right information on the CI? How could you automate standing up a new virtual machine on your virtual cluster if you don't actually know how many CPU, what the total CPU capacity on the cluster is? For all you know, you're going to overload that system and degrade service across all those VMs. So you've got to be capturing that information. You've got to be going to the different tools, and you've got to be bringing those trusted sources together. But because of the duplication that they will bring, you need to solve that problem. A quote that I saw quite a lot during this work, it's from Technopedia, but they estimate that the CMDB data is only actionable when it's 97% accurate. So that's considerably more than the old 80-20 rule, which I've seen in the past used as that will do. And they estimate that the average accuracy is on the whole less than 75%. So there's a lot of work to be done there to bring that number up. And if you are up there in the 90+% percentile, well done, is all I can say to you. So that's actually the last slide that I've got in the presentation. For those of you that joined a little bit late, what I suggested, if you had any questions that you wanted to ask, if you can fire them across into the chat window to me, then I will get to addressing those. And while I just wait for some of those to come in, I'm just going to jump forward to a contact slide so that there's some people you can contact should you need to. So there's Sharon, who's my colleague from ESM. If you have any more follow-up information or questions that you would like, there's our website and a link to our ServiceNow partners information. And there's email there for Chris Spangler. Chris, I believe, is on the call with us today, so he may be able to help if there's something more BDNA specific to answer. And then there's a link to their BDNA ServiceNow, and that YouTube video there I think is particularly informative, and In fact, just see a question coming in. So yes, that YouTube video will actually address at least one of the questions. So the first question that's come in. So work with different customers, some having asset items or asset database, some having configuration items, but not many having both. So can BDMA add value if we only have one or the other, or do you have to have both to benefit? So interesting question, because certainly in ServiceNow, the separation of asset and configuration is not that straightforward. In fact, if you have CIs, you typically have an asset, whether you use asset management or not, and vice versa. That said, yes, it will provide value. It's giving you that standard strong reference data for you to leverage in your processes, and that will always give you benefit. I think it will probably give you the most benefit if you did have both, but if you needed it only from an asset or only from a configuration management perspective, then you'll get that benefit. And should your organization choose to expand, either from config to asset or asset to config, you continue to reap that benefit into the other space. So there's a question there about how BDMA can help with internal data such as assignment groups. So BDMA is a tool that's really about dealing with the discovery data coming in from your trusted sources, normalizing those. For the assignment groups, the point I was making there was about the control that you need as an organization as well. It's not a one or the other. It's both working in unity together to bring you that benefit. When we talk about trusted sources, one of the things that we never talk about as trusted sources is your change process or your incident process and the human element interacting with those. There is always metadata in an organization that is pertinent only to that organization, that cannot be discovered, cannot be pulled in from trusted sources. That is going to require human elements. We need to be, across the ITSM space, ultimately getting to the point where we can trust data that comes through from change, incident, problem processes as well. Hopefully that answers the question on that one. Yeah, another question. So how quickly can we expect to see any benefits and a return on investment using BDMA? I would strongly suggest that you see the YouTube video for this one, because the answer to that is probably minutes before you start to see the benefit. So it's minutes to integrate that into ServiceNow. It couldn't be more straightforward, and seriously, look at the YouTube video and you'll see what I mean. But I would add to that, beware that you always bring the people with you, because if you've already deployed data and it's in a certain state, people will be begrudgingly used to that data quality, and if you don't inform them and keep the lines of communication open to them that this improved data is coming, when it suddenly changes, they'll probably get a bit of a shock and won't know what they're looking at for a bit of time. And then there's the other aspect of it. If you've built reports, gauges, dashboards that depend on the data in the shape it was, you'll probably have to do some work to make sure that those things reflect what you desire once you've got the good, consistent data at the back supporting it. Right, yes, there's a question here about any reference sites and customers it could visit or speak to. So from the NiZSN perspective, I would ask that if you could send a note through to Sharon Holland at innovize.com there on the screen, and she can arrange follow-up with you on that. And certainly for the BDMA integrations example, could you contact Chris, whose email address is also up there on the screen. And no, that's all that's come through at the moment. Would anyone else on the call have any questions? If not, what I'll do is wrap it up a little bit early so that everyone can have a little bit of time back to their day. I know everyone's very busy. Okay. Well, If there's nothing more, then I would just like to thank you all for attending today and wish you the best for the rest of your day or evening or afternoon, and maybe speak to you again soon. Thank you.